We often hear that bigger is better with AI models, right? Especially for tough stuff like math reasoning.
Yeah, that's the general assumption. But there's some new research that's really making waves.
Exactly what we're diving into today. It looks at how a, well, relatively small language model can actually beat much larger ones on complex math
We're
problems.
talking about 5-4 mini reasoning. It's a 3.8 billion parameter model.
Which sounds like a lot, but in the world of large models, it's...
It's really quite compact, and yet it's outperforming models nearly twice its size on these hard reasoning tasks. It's quite surprising.
So for you listening, maybe you want to get up to speed on this quickly, understand what's really going on without wading through dense jargon. That's the plan here.
hmm Our mission is basically to unpack the main techniques from the paper that let this smaller model punch so far above its weight.
And we'll keep it clear, focusing on what they actually did.
Okay, so first off, why is reasoning usually harder for these smaller models, the SLMs?
Well, it mostly comes down to capacity, right? Fewer parameters mean sort of less space to hold and process complex information compared to the giants, the LLMs.
That's the challenge. And one key technique that people use to help models reason better is chain of thought, or COTI.
Right, where you prompt the model to think step by step, show it's working, essentially.
Yeah, generating those intermediate steps,
Yeah.
it really helps improve reasoning performance.
And didn't some earlier work, DeepSeek R1, I think, touch on this?
It did. They found that you could significantly boost a smaller model's reasoning by distilling knowledge from a larger model using synthetic data that included these COTI steps.
But they didn't quite reveal how they did it in detail.
Not fully, no. It showed the potential, but left some questions open.
Which brings us to this 5-4 mini work. They lay out a very systematic 4-step training recipe specifically designed for these smaller models.
That's the core of it. Step one, they call distillation as mid-training.
Okay,
Yeah.
what does that involve?
So this was large-scale training. They used a lot of diverse data that had these long chain-of-thought reasoning steps.
And this data came from?
It was generated by that large DeepSeek R1 model we mentioned, but crucially, they filtered it.
Filtered how?
They only kept the examples where the final answer was actually correct.
Ah, okay. So starting with known good reasoning paths.
Right. And they used something called packing mode during training.
What's that for?
It's mainly for efficiency. You sort of bundle shorter examples together to process them faster. The goal here was just to give the base model that general COTI reasoning ability.
Got it. So that's step one. What's step two?
Step two is distillation as supervised fine-tuning. So still distillation, but different.
How so?
Here, they fine-tune the model again, but on a much smaller, really high-quality subset of that data from the first step, more curated.
And they stopped using that packing mode.
Correct. No packing this time. This helps the model learn, when to naturally stop generating its response.
Makes sense. And the data itself.
Still math, very diverse domains, but the difficulty was even higher here. They mentioned it exceeded typical college-level problems. Pretty advanced stuff.
Okay, that's 2 steps focused on distillation. What's step 3? This one sounds interesting. Roll out DPO.
Leveraging a carefully curated preference data set. Yes, this is quite neat. Remember how in step one, they only kept the correct answers from the LLM?
Yeah.
Well, here they went back to the incorrect answers that they'd initially thrown out.
Reusing the mistakes.
How? They used them to build a preference data set. So for a given problem, the model's correct cut-time answer is preferred, and an incorrect cut-time answer it generated is dispreferred.
Okay, creating pairs of good versus bad reasoning for the same problem.
You got it. But they were careful about which problems they used. They filtered again.
How this time?
They only used questions rated as high school level math or harder. They actually used GPT-4 Mini to help classify the difficulty.
Interesting. And then they use DPO.
Direct preference optimization, yes. It's a technique to fine-tune the model to, well, prefer generating the good answers over the bad ones based on that data set.
All right, distillation, more distillation than preference tuning. What's the final step?
Step 4, reinforcement learning, RL, with verifiable reward.
Okay, RL. How did they apply it here?
It's another fine-tuning stage. The reward signal was super simple and verifiable. Was the final answer correct or not?
Just the bottom line number?
Yep. +1 reward if the final computed answer was right, -1 if it was wrong. Very clear signal.
Did the RL part go smoothly? Sometimes that can be tricky.
They did mention running into some typical RL challenges, particularly when trying a method called GRPO directly.
Like what?
Things like the model generating answers of wildly different lengths, which can destabilize training, and the classic vanishing gradients problem.
So how did they stabilize it?
They had a few tricks. One was prompt optimization, basically choosing starting prompts that usually lead to more consistently sized answers.
Okay, managing the output length.
Then, reward rebalancing. This involved focusing more on the harder prompts by oversampling them, and also filtering training data based on how well the model was doing on groups of similar problems.
Kind of steering the learning towards the tough spots.
And the third thing was temperature annealing.
Lowering the randomness over time.
Yeah, gradually decreasing the sampling temperature during training, making the model's outputs less random and more focused as it learned.
So this whole four-step process, what were the actual results? Did it work?
Oh, it definitely worked. The headline result is that 5-4 mini reasoning, remember, 3.8 billion parameters.
A small one.
It outperformed much larger models, specifically designed for reasoning on benchmarks like Math 500.
Outperformed by how much?
It scored 3.2 points higher than a 7 billion parameter model, DeepSeek R1 Distill Quinn 7b, and a pretty big jump, 7.7 points higher than an 8 billion parameter one, DeepSeek R1 Distill Llama 8b.
Wow, so smaller but significantly better scores on that test.
And it wasn't just Math 500. The paper has a figure 1 showing it achieved top results on other really tough benchmarks too, like AME24 and GPQA Diamond.
So consistently strong performance across different challenges.
There's also a table 3, which gives a broader comparison against models like O1 Mini, Bespoke Stratos 7b, OpenThinker 7b, 5-4 Mini holds its own or leads.
Do they give specific scores?
Yep. On AIM, 57.5. Math 500 was 94.6, which is very high. And GPQA Diamond, 52.0. Really solid numbers across the board.
Did they try to figure out which parts of their training process made the biggest difference?
They did. They ran an ablation study. That's where you systematically remove parts of the process to see the impact. It's in Figure 2A.
And what did that show?
It showed pretty clearly that each stage contributed. There were big jumps in performance after the 2 distillation steps, and then the RL stage added further gains on top.
So every step mattered.
It seems so. They also compared their RL approach, specifically how stable it was, against another method called DAPO. Interestingly, in their experiments, DAPO's performance actually started to degrade over time, whereas their method showed consistent improvement. Figure 2B illustrates that.
Suggests their stabilization techniques for RL were quite effective.
Seems that way.
Let's talk about the fuel for all this, the data. What kind of data set did they use for all this training?
It was massive. The paper mentions around 10 million rollouts. Think of those as reasoning attempts across about 1.6 million unique problems or samples.
Where did all that data come from?
It was a mix. They aggregated several public data sets known for reasoning, like Bespoke, OpenThoughts, OpenR1 Math.
Okay, standard sources.
And they also used some of their own in-house data sets. Table 2 in the paper lists them all out.
Now, not all data sets come with those chain of thought steps, right? How did they handle that?
Good point. For data sets that just had the problem and final answer, they used that big DeepSeek R1 671B model, again, to generate the COTI reasoning steps.
And just trusted its output?
No, they verified it. They used both a specialized math verification tool and GPT-4o Mini to check if the reasoning actually led to the correct final answer. Quality control was key.
Lots of effort on the data side.
Definitely. They even annotated the data further, tagging each problem with its math domain, its difficulty level like elementary, high school, college, even graduate level.
Wow, very granular.
And also flagging if it had repetitive patterns. This helped them balance the data sets and pick the right kind of data for each specific training stage we discussed.
So bringing it all together then, the big takeaway from this 5-4 mini reasoning work seems to be what?
I think it really shows quite powerfully that with a really well thought out multi-stage training strategy and crucially very high quality data,
Even these smaller language models can reach or even exceed state-of-the-art reasoning performance.
yeah, beating out models much, much larger than them, especially in tough domains like math.
It's quite a striking result, isn't it? It sort of pushes back against that simple idea that reasoning power just scales directly with model size.
It really does.
Yeah.
It suggests that how you train and what you train on can be just as important, maybe even more so in some cases, than just raw scale.
And for you listening, hopefully this breakdown gives you a clearer picture of how these advancements are happening. It's about smart techniques, not just brute force.
The meticulous data preparation, the staged learning approach from general GoADT to preference tuning to RL, it's a sophisticated recipe.
It certainly offers food for thought. If smaller, more efficient models can become this capable at complex reasoning,
What new applications might that open up, especially where computational resources are constrained?
that's definitely something to ponder. If you want to dig even deeper into the specifics, the methodology, the full results.
The paper itself, 5ormanyreasoning.pdf, is the place to go. It lays everything out in detail.
A fascinating piece of work showing the power of smart training.